Chapter 1. The Myth of the Planet Tormance. In conclusion, let me tell you about the origin of the name. In the fifth period of the EDW, in the Western sphere of world culture, dissatisfaction with civilization, sprung from the capitalist form of society, was a mess, ing. Many writers and scientists tried to look into the future. The presentiment of artists was instilled as anxiety in the thoughts of progressive people before the impending crisis in those years, when the brewing contradictions were culminating in military conflicts. But with the invention of long-range missiles and nuclear weapons, fear for the future fate of mankind became universal and, naturally, was reflected in art. In the House of Arts, a painting of those times is preserved. The short caption below it is completely understandable to us: the final minute. In a vast field, giant rockets stand in rows, like tall crosses in an ancient cemetery. A dull, sunless sky looms low, menacingly outlined by the sharp peaks of warheads, the monstrous carriers of thermonuclear death. People, cravenly looking around, as if themselves in fear of what they have done, run single file towards the black cave of a deep dugout. The artist is able to convey the feeling of a terrible disaster already inevitable, since in response to the death of millions of innocent people, the same missiles will fly from where the cruciform monsters are now aimed. It is not those who run into the dugout who will perish, but the man and woman depicted on the other side of the diptych, young and handsome, kneeling on the banks of a large river. The woman hugs a small child to her, and an older boy clings tightly to his father with his little hands. The man embraces the woman and the children, his head turned back to where a giant sword protrudes from the rolling cloud of an atomic explosion, raised above the pitiful figures of people. The woman does not look back. She regards the viewer, and the infinite anguish of inevitable doom written on her face oppresses all who see this picture. The helplessness of the man is no less strongly expressed. He knows that everything is over, and his only wish, sooner. Moods similar to those reflected in the painting, among people professing the Christian religion and unconditionally believing in special, mystical, as they were then called, forces, standing above nature, appeared even earlier, after the First World War of the EDW. Moralists had long foreseen the inevitability of the collapse of the old morality, stemming from religious dogmas, together with the decline of religion. But unlike the philosophers, dialecticians, they saw no way out in the restructuring of society. An example of such a reaction to reality became for us the small book by Arthur Lindsay, preserved from this period, about a fantastic journey to a certain planet in the Arcturus star system. Of course, the journey was thought to be spiritual, mystical. The technology of that time could not even think of any starships. On an imagined planet, the atonement of the sins of humanity took place. The wretched life full of melancholy, outlined by the author, surprises with a wealth of fantasy. The planet was called Tormance, which in a forgotten language meant torment. Such was the birth of the myth of the planet of torment, which was then used, as far as one can judge, by artists and writers of many generations. To the myth of Tormance they returned more than once, and this always happened during periods of crises, heavy war, famine, and a nebulous future. For us, the planet Tormance was just one of many thousands of tales sunk into oblivion. But everyone knows that 72 years ago, along the Great Circle, we received the first news of the strange planet of the Red Sun in the Lynx constellation. The historian Ken Rook, who extracted from the confusion of times the original source of the myth, named the new planet Tormance, a symbol of the arduous life of people in a mal-arranged society. The deep voice of Phirotis fell silent, and for a moment in the chamber of the Astronautical Council, quiet ensued. Then a thin man with unruly red hair appeared at the podium. The whole planet knew him well, both as the direct descendant of the famous Renbaz, the first to carry out the experiment of the direct beam and almost dying in the process, and as a theorist of navigation of the DBS. People who had seen the monument to Renbaz thought Velhag looked very similar to his great-grandfather. The calculations are complete and do not contradict the hypothesis of Phi. Despite the colossal remoteness of Tormance, it is quite possible that those very 3 starships that left Earth at the beginning of the EWR made it to this planet. Let us imagine that the ships fell into a region of negative gravity, dropped into zero space, and from there, naturally, slid backward, in an instant covering hundreds of parsecs. With complete ignorance in the field 25 THE hour of the bull of astronavigation, the death of the starships was inevitable, but they were saved by the purely accidental coincidence of an exit point with a planet very similar in properties to our Earth. It is now known that planets of our type are not at all a rare phenomenon, and, as a rule, are found in almost every stellar system with several satellites. Therefore, the discovery of such a planet is, in itself, not surprising, but reaching it in the star-poor latitudes of the galaxy, this is an exceptional event. In ancient times it was said, having grown wise to the law of preliminary overcoming of circumstances, that success accompanies madmen. So here too, the mad enterprise of the fugitives from Earth, fanatics not wanting to submit to the inevitable course of history, was crowned with success. They ventured at random into the then newly discovered cluster of dark stars near the Sun, not suspecting that this spot, surrounded by a belt of dark matter, was not at all the complex system of an invisible star, but a hole, a place where the longitudinal structure of spaces flowed around the undulation of Tormance. I looked again at the records of the memory machines of message 886,449, 105th key, 21st group of the 26th informational center of the Great Circle. Descriptions of the inhabitants of Tormance are scarce. An expedition from a planet in the constellation of Cepheus, whose name has not yet been translated into the language of the Circle, was able to obtain only a few images, and from them it can be judged that the Tormanceans are very similar to those people who made that desperate attempt many centuries ago. The bipolar probability has already been calculated. It is 0.4. The machine of general reasoning in all districts summed up yes with a high index, and the Academy of Grief and Joy has also spoken in favor of sending the expedition. Velhag left the podium and was replaced by the chairman of the council. After such argumentation, there is nothing for the council to decide. We obey the opinion of the planet. A solid glow of green lights in the hall was the response to the words of the chairman. The latter continued. The council immediately moves ahead with work on the formation of the expedition. Of ultimate importance is the selection of the astronauts. Dark Flame, our second DBS, is not huge, and we will not be able to send as many people as required. The starship is controlled by 8 people, all permanent except for navigators. 5 people on top of that, counting the expedition leader, is the maximum that Dark Flame can take without the unbearable constriction of people. We are bitterly aware of the fact that our DBSs are still nothing more than experimental vehicles, and those who drive them are, in essence, testers of the most dangerous type of movement in the cosmos. Every flight, especially to an unknown area of the universe, is still fraught with a deathly risk. In one of the upper rows of the hall, a red light flashed 3 times. A young man in a wide, white cloak stood up. "Do we really need to emphasize the danger?" he declared. "Ye are aware of how much this increases the flow of applicants, even in technical experience. But this is about Tormance, about the possibility of connecting with our people, a fragment of humanity accidentally thrown into the measureless distance of space." The chairman shook his head. "Ye have recently returned from Jupiter and missed the details of the discussion. There is not a grain of doubt. We must do it. If the inhabitants of Tormance are people from Earth, then our and their great-grandfathers breathed the same air, the molecules of which fill our lungs. We have a common gene pool, a common blood, as they would have said in that era in which they flew from Earth. And if life is as difficult for them as Kenrook and his collaborators believe, all the more must we hurry." We in the council spoke of the danger as a special motive for recruiting people. I remind ye again and once more, we cannot use force, we cannot come to them either as punishing or all-forgiving messengers of a higher world. It would be madness to compel them to change their lives, and therefore a very special tact and approach is needed on this unprecedented expedition. "But what do ye hope for?" the man from Jupiter asked with concern. "If their misfortune, like the vast majority of all misfortunes, is due to ignorance, that is, blindness of knowledge, then let them recover their sight, and we will be the healers of their eyes. If the disease is from the difficult general conditions of the planet, we will invite them to heal their economy and techniques. In all cases, it is our duty to come as healers," the chairman replied, and all the members of the council rose as one person to express their full agreement. "And if they don't want it?" objected the Jupiterian. The chairman reluctantly replied, "Contact the Academy of Prediction of the Future. It is already discussing different variants. We, before the members of the council disperse into working groups, must all together decide the question of who will head the expedition." The name of Phi Rodis, student of Kenrook, expert on EDW history, caused the belts of green lights to flash. "It seems to me," the chairman added, preparing to leave the podium, "that we need to select people as young as possible, including the specialists of the ship. In terms of psyche, the younger are closer to EDW and EWR than mature people who have gone far along the path of self-perfection and sometimes poorly understand the suddenness and power of the emotions of youth." The chairman smiled mischievously as he imagined the indignant statements that would be received from youth groups by way of the information center of the Astronautical Council. The place of departure of the DBS Dark Flame was chosen in order that she may be seen off by the largest number of people. The step plane and a ring of low hills on the Ravat Plateau in India turned out, in this sense, to be ideal. Like all the first direct beam starships, Dark Flame traveled beyond the solar system on ordinary animazon motors, and there, at a pre-calculated point, screened her state in our system of space-time. This made it possible to stand on the border of Tormance in zero space. The lumbersome form of the starship encumbered her liftoff from Earth. She had to lift not on planetary but immediately on animazonic engines. For this reason, the first DBSs could not take off from ordinary cosmodromes, but only in remote and deserted places. Two-horn magnetic field activators moved out for protection. Those gathered on the hills took refuge behind a metallic lattice, wearing special half masks, reliably covering their ears, nose, and mouth with a layer of soft plastic. Signals lit up on the horns of the activators, barely visible in the light of the tropical morning. The green dome of the huge ship trembled, jumped a dozen meters, and froze for those few seconds in which the magnetic shock-absorbing shafts inside the ship were gaining full power. Dark Flame hung, slowly revolving around a vertical axis. A pale, shimmering pillar of animazon spread beneath her to the edges of the defensive wall. Suddenly, the starship made a second vertical leap into the sky and immediately disappeared. The surprise, the simplicity, and the nasty, cutting squeal did not at all resemble the thunderous and triumphant departure of ordinary starships. Giant and formidable ships left the Earth majestically, as if proud of their strength, but this one disappeared, as if fleeing. The seers-off dispersed, somewhat disenchanted. Far from everyone imagined for themselves the peril of the DBS and the difficulty of the expedition. Only an ardent ideation, or deep knowledge, or both together, compelled some people to remain in pensive thoughtfulness in front of the empty hollow covered with white powder of burnt soil. No matter how human reason had enriched and developed over the past 3,000 years, it still perceived some phenomena from only one perspective, external to itself, and refused to believe that this hulking structure was capable of almost instantly piercing space, instead of obediently spinning within it like rays of light for thousands of years through the owl's load channels of its complex structure. Using its magnetic inertia suppressors, Dark Flame continued to gain speed with the same murderous leaps that had been death to previous starships, and communication with the ship was cut off. Inside Dark Flame, as soon as the instruments of the SSV, Shakti Space Velocity, were set at 0.10129, all the crew members left the inertial chamber, dispersing to their posts. In the flattened spheroid of the cockpit, suspended in the center of the dome, were only the commander of the ship Griff Rift, Phyrotis, and Div Symbol. Calculation after calculation, the Shakti variance, the orientation of the starship, instantly enumerated by the electronic brain of the course control panel, were rejected. With dexterous lightning-fast turns of the levers, Div Symbol deliberately introduced interference to the distortion of the gravitational curves and interruptions, imitating Finnegan's accidents. Finally, a faint glow illuminated the 4 yellow stars in the final porthole, and the vibration of the starship calmed. Dark Flame was on course. The engineer activated the autopilot and stood motionless over the stability dial. Phyrotis and Griff Rift stood silently on the disc in the cockpit floor, which lowered them to the second partition of the ship. Here, both astronavigators, together with Sol Cyan, worked on the calculations of the points of entry and of exit. Both had to be ready simultaneously, as the starship glided on the border of Tormance in zero space, for only a short time expended on turns after entering and exiting. For advancement in zero space, the time of Shakti did not exist. The accuracy of the calculation for navigation of this kind exceeded imagination, and not so long ago was considered inaccessible. The first DBS knowledge was able to come out only in approximately designated areas of space. The probability of error was great, which had ultimately led to the death of Nogin. After the invention of the cascade method of correlation, it became possible to determine the exit point with an accuracy of 500 million kilometres. The devices for feeling out gravitational fields from zero space, which had been created at almost the same time, excluded such catastrophes as coming out at a star or other dangerous accumulations of matter. The insanely daring researchers of Tormance pinned their hopes on these devices. And now Noreen and Manticore were inserting into their machines all the preliminary calculations carried out by the giant institutions of Earth in order to translate them into concrete conditions at the place of annihilation of the starship. They worked slowly, but also without distraction. They had 43 days at their disposal. Phi Rotis gestured goodbye to Rift and walked slowly down the soft path towards her cabin, positioned in a row on the periphery of the second deck. Her presence was not required anywhere. For months, the crew of the ship and experts of the expedition would not need any instructions for their daily work, conditions already existing for thousands of years for the people of Earth. While nothing was happening, the time of Phi Rotis belonged to her, especially since much of the doings were immeasurably beyond her competence. A thick, fibrous silicol door automatically opened and closed, letting Phi Rotis through. She increased the flow of air into the cabin, adding to it with her favorite aroma, the fresh, warm scent of the African plains heated by the sun. The walls of the cabin hummed faintly, as if the wind-blown savanna was really around. Phi Rotis sat on the low sofa, and slid down onto a hard white carpet in front of a magnetic table. Among the items clinging to its surface stood a small diorama, framed in a golden oval. Rotis moved an inconspicuous lever, and the little object transformed into an opening, a window into an immense distance of living and powerful colors of nature. Over a bluish plain, descending into the unknown, flew a fragile, hovering craft shaped like a cumbrous platform, with roughly protruding corners, crooked stands, and a dusty surface. On the craft, grasping hold of some lever, there stood two young people. A young man with sharp features was holding a Mongolian-looking girl tightly by the waist. Her black braids fluttered in the wind, and one hand was raised up, perhaps a signal, perhaps a gesture of farewell. A gloomy, dust-swept plain with stunted vegetation ran down into a chasm lurking ahead, covered by a rampart of thick yellow clouds. This strange device had come to Rotis by way of her teacher, Kin Rook, who saw in it a symbolism corresponding to his dreams. For Kin Rook, who finally revealed the infernality of the past times, this diorama became a link with those long-disappeared people, ancestors to whose thoughts and feelings he was heir, by which to appreciate and understand the immeasurable power of their feats. Those who did not accept the hopeless circle of suffering, fear, disease, and melancholy that had enveloped the Earth from ancient geological epochs, until the time when, in the EWR, it finally became possible to build a truly high society, a communist one. Very difficult work for a historian, especially at a time when scientists had begun to deal with the most important, the history of spiritual values, the process of reformation of consciousness, and the structure of the noosphere, the sum of created by humanity knowledge, art, and dreams. True carriers of culture once constituted a diminutive minority. The disappearance of spiritual values from archaeological documentation, with the exception of palatial objects of art, is completely natural. Not infrequently did whole islands of high cultures disappear in ruins and under the dust of millennia, breaking the chain of historical development. With the increase in the population of the Earth and the development of a European-type monoculture, historians managed to move from subjective guesswork to a genuine analysis of historical processes. On the other hand, it became more difficult to extract the true meaning of the documentation. Disinformation and Hainu lies became instruments of the political struggle for power. The entire fifth period of the EDW, to the study of which Phi Rotis devoted herself, was characterized by colossal heaps of pseudo-historical works of precisely this kind. Drowning in their mass were individual documents and books, reflecting the true composition of cause and effect. Phi Rotis recalled the strange feeling of horror and aversion that had come to her as she deepened into the chosen epoch. In concentrated reflections, she was as if reincarnated as a kind of average person of those times, one-sidedly educated, poorly informed, laden with prejudices, and a naive stemming from ignorance belief in miracles. the scientist of those times, seemed emotionally deaf, the emotionally enriched artist, ignorant to the point of blindness. And between these extremes, an ordinary person of the EDW, left to his own devices, not disciplined by upbringing, sickly, losing faith in himself and people, and on the verge of a nervous breakdown, rushed from one absurdity to the next in his short life, which depended on a multitude of chance happenings. The most terrible thing seemed to be the absence of a clear goal and a thirst for knowledge of the world among so many people, who looked without interest into a dark future that promised no significant changes, with its inescapable end, death. The novice 25-year-old researcher had approached her teacher, head bowed. Virotis had always considered herself capable of dling, the difficult field of ancient mono-history, but now she felt her emotional weakness. The wish had grown in Virotis to descend into even greater antiquity, where separate centers of civilizations did not provide the possibility of mono-historical synthesis, and which seemed far more beautiful. Insufficiency of facts gave scope to speculation, illuminated by the ideas of the era of met-hands. The surviving works of art clothed what little was known with an aura of great spiritual ascent. Kien Rook, not hiding a smile, had suggested Phi continue studying EDW for another year. When Rhodus began to see how the spiritual, moral, ethical foundations of the future world were forged in the mal-arranged life of the EDW, she was amazed and completely captured by the picture of the great struggle for knowledge, truth, justice, for the conscious conquest of health and beauty. For the first time, she understood the seemingly mysterious suddenness of the turning point in history at the turn of the EWR, when humanity, exhausted by its existence on the brink of an all-destroying war, fragmented by class, national and linguistic strife, depleting the natural resources of the planet, accomplished world socialist unification. Now, from the distance of centuries, this giant step forward gave the impression of an unexpected leap. Tracing the roots of the future, striking confidence in the light and beautiful being of man became, for Virotis, the main mission of life. And now, 15 years later, upon reaching 40 years of maturity, it had brought her to the lead of an unprecedented expedition to an immensely distant world, similar to the earthly period of the end of the EDW, oligarchic state capitalism, somehow stalled in what was considered inevitable historical social development. If this was so, then they were to meet a dangerous society poisoned by false ideas, where the value of an individual is negligible and his life, without a waiver, is sacrificed for any number of reasons: the state structure, money, the production process, and finally, any war for any motive. She would have to come face to face with this world, and not only as a dispassionate researcher, whose role is to watch, study, and deliver the collected materials to her home planet. She had been chosen, of course, not for her insignificant scientific achievements, but as a messenger of the Earth, a woman of the EMH, who, with all her depth of feelings, tact, and tenderness, could convey to the descendants of her native planet the joy of the bright life of the communist world. Virotis turned off the diorama with a dismissive gesture. Taking with her a particle of the dream of her teacher, what is this, if not an echo of her previous confusion from the knowledge of EDW? At that moment, as the starship rushed towards an unknown fate, she looked at the flying girl as if at a friend. She stood in full readiness, raising as a signal a slender hand, before descending into the abyss. And Rhodus too would soon face the mortally dangerous world of Tormance. Her companions would await from her a decisive signal. Virotis moved a lever under the sofa cushion, and part of the cabin wall became a mirror. For a moment she studied her face in it, looking for similarities with the tragically tense face of the girl. However, the firm, symmetrical face of a mature woman of the EMH, with a perfectly sculpted structure of strong bones, showing under expressive muscles, and flawless skin, was very different from the half-child expression of the EDW girl, even though the two shared similar experiences. The anticipation of tribulations and anxiety for the success of the expedition deepened the seriousness of the green eyes of Virotis, more sharply outlined the stubborn and adamant cut of the lips. Virotis opened her eyes wider and raised her hand with the gesture of the flying girl on the platform, but the mirror reflected it as pathetic and comic. Laughing briefly, Rhodus removed the mirror, threw off her dress, and lay down on the sofa, relaxing her body and staring up at the bluish, slightly glowing sphere above her head. She remained motionless for about 3 hours, until, in the system of concentric circles on the ceiling, A yellow dot lit up and a faint ringing sounded. Phi performed some gymnastic exercises. A few more minutes, and in front of the mirror stood a different woman, one who seemed sterner and more severe, in the soft, tight-fitting clothes of an astronaut and with short, tightly styled hair. She put a heavy signal wristband on her left arm and left the cabin. In a circular room, also on the central axis of the ship, under the pilot's spheroid and computers, the members of the expedition had already gathered. The dials of the backup instruments came to life, and at the same moment, Menticore and Div symbol slipped into the hall through a hatch in the ceiling. The PX string was UIETLY, singing in B-flat, signifying that everything was normal in the work of the Guardians of Electronic Communications. The spaceship no longer required attention and was heading on a pre-assigned course in the direction of the galactic pole. The expectant silence forced Phi to immediately move ahead with the most difficult, the division of people into those who would disembark and those who would remain in the inviolable crew of the ship. She began by showing photographs transmitted along the circle by the alien expedition from Cephi. They would have reached Earth in the usual way in another 2.5 millennia had the DBS from the planets in the region of the constellation of the Dragon not come to our part of the galaxy and not delivered messages to the 26th segment of the Great Circle. The Cephian expedition had orbited the planet Tormance only twice, and, not receiving permission to land, left, having conducted a general survey of the planet and its inhabitants using intercepted broadcasts of television programs. The red sun of Tormance, a common star for the earthly observer, was located in the constellation Lynx, a dark, star-poor region of the high latitudes of the galaxy. No one would have imagined that inhabitants of Earth could settle in such depths of space. But the photographs transmitted along the circle left no doubt they were people completely similar to Earthlings. It was difficult to judge the color of their skin, perhaps it did not differ from the darker Earthlings. The narrow and long eyes seemed impenetrably dark. The slanting eyebrows raised to the bridge of the nose gave the faces a slightly tragic expression. Anthropologists found in the profiles of the inhabitants of Tormance features of mongoloid flattening, and their small stature and weak, mostly irregular physiques were also reminiscent of people of the end of the EDW and the beginning of the EWR. The surface of the planet, captured in the breaks of the cloud cover, did not resemble Earth. Rather, it could be compared to a planet of the green sun. The ray tracing indicator told the trained gaze of planetographers about the depth of the sea's Tormance, shallow in comparison with the oceans of Earth. Apparently, the thickness of the atmosphere of Tormance was equal to that of Earth. A scarlet sun illuminated the planet, lyingly, spinning on its side, its axis aligned with its orbital plane, and its journey around the star swifter than that of the Earth. If the vegetation and, consequently, the composition of the atmosphere here are similar to ours, if there are no particularly pathogenic organisms here, then it is easy to live on this planet. Torlik broke the silence. There should be no abrupt climate changes, excess radiation, earthquakes, hurricanes, and other catastrophic phenomena that we for so long had to mitigate. To all appearances ye are right, Griffrift confirmed. But why then Tormance? Maybe the state of the planet is not so bad, and the teacher of Phi only revived a myth of the past? It was said that he was too bold in naming the planet, based only on preliminary data. Orbital demographic profiles of the Cephian expedition showed a population of about 15 billion people. The circulation of the water mass and the character of the relief indicate the impossibility of biological prosperity for such a large number of people. Famine can be avoided if scientific discoveries in the production of synthetic food are made on the planet or are accepted along the circle, bypassing the medium of higher-order organisms. They do not communicate with the Great Circle, and the refusal by the whole planet to accept an alien starship speaks of the existence of a closed, centralized power, for which the appearance of guests from the cosmos is unfavorable. Consequently, this power is afraid of the high knowledge of the aliens, indicating its low level, which does not provide the proper social scientific organization of society. No one else answered the call of the Cephian starship. This means that the oligarchic system does not allow anyone to use powerful transmitters, even in extreme cases. In such a case, there is a suppression of individual interests on the planet. After all, the appearance of a starship is the kind of event to which millions of people should respond, said Phi. and from the history of the planets, it is known that such a system always coincides with scientific backwardness and technical regression. Ken Rook was right, Chedidan exclaimed. A huge population without accelerated progress will quickly deplete the resources of the planet, worsen living conditions, and further weaken progress. In a word, the circle has closed. My teacher substantiated his name for the planet with similar words, for in such conditions, according to the formula of infernality, the torment of people is inevitable, confirmed Phirotis. Do ye mean the old formula or its new development given by Ken Rook? Both. The theory was put forward and named by a philosopher and scientist of the EDW. I know, replied Chetidan. It was Efremov who lived in the 5th period. We will discuss the theory later. By becoming a companion of Tormance, we will be able to observe its life, said Phirotis. And now we will divide into 2 groups. Everyone will prepare themselves for the multifaceted enlightening activity that awaits both those who remain to guard the dark flame and those who will set foot on the forbidden soil of the planet. But if they refuse again, asked Div Symbol. I have thought up a method that will give us access to the planet, answered Phirotis. Who will you take from the crew of the ship? Asked Solsane. In addition to me and the 3 specialists of the expedition, that is, Chedi, Tiviza, and Tor, we need a doctor, a technologist, and a computist of the highest class, who knows the methods of stochastics. Landing in the capacity of technologist will be General Atoll, whose responsibility for the armor protection of the ship will be taken over by Nea Holly. The computist will be the first astronavigator, Vir Noreen, and the doctor, we have only one. Thank you, Phi. Iviza blew a kiss, and Vir Noreen nodded happily, not taking his eyes off Phirotis, a slight blush painting his cheeks, pale from the intense work of the last months in the cramped spaces of the ship. Genital pressed his thin lips tightly together, and a deep vertical wrinkle formed between his eyebrows. And what about me? Oladez exclaimed with displeasure. I have prepared for the landing and am in the best shape. I thought I could also fulfill the dual roles of researcher and demonstrator, show Tormance plastic dances. And ye will show, Ola, undoubtedly, Phirotis assured, through the screen of our ship. Ye are needed here for communication with personal robots and remote filming. However, if all goes well, then each of us will be a guest of Tormance. In the meantime, the calculation is for the very worst, said Oladez with a wry face. For worse, but not the worst.